Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is May the 5th. Our regular panel tonight includes myself, John Lidkey, Doug Sartori, and Pat Papadeus. We are excited to have with us tonight as our guest, Stewart Lyons, the CEO and founder of Bird Canada. If you are a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much. If not, head on over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. Make sure to sign up. It helps the show happen. We're available on BizX Magazine every month and on bizxmagazine.com on all your favorite social media apps. And kind thanks to Leuna625 Building Better Communities for making this show possible live on tape. We will get right into the show tonight. As I said, we have the CEO and founder of Bird Canada, Stewart Lyons, here today. We are talking about the rollout of their e-scooters, soon to be e-bikes as well in Windsor. There was a brief hiccup in the deployment, if you will. There was a theft, a few of them actually, of 150 that were deployed. Around 10%, so it sounds like 15, I suppose, were stolen. So there's some logistics that we've heard about that had to be assessed, primarily getting the devices back. You all know the story about it. We've spoken about these devices before, how they're rented out, they're dockless, you can pick them up when you want them, you leave them where you leave them, and they are recharged and sanitized on a nightly basis. But we're so glad to have the CEO, the founder, Stewart Lyons, here. Stewart, how are you tonight? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen, and Pat as well. And Pat, I want to call out Pat's background, which is a nice, lovely photo of some Bird scooters in Windsor. So thank you, Pat, for that. And nice to meet you, Jon and Doug.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you here. So let's just, we'll start with a conversation. There was the rollout, obviously, this little tiny issue. You were saying in the pre-show that we just had lobby there that they're actually back out on the streets already. Some of them, people are riding them. So what's it been like launching in Windsor? And is Windsor any different from any other city that you launch in?
Yeah, thanks. So this is our fifth market, I think, in Canada that we've launched. We've been in Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Montreal. We had a little pilot in Toronto a couple of years ago, and then we launched obviously in Windsor. It was hugely successful and went really strong over the weekend. People really embraced them. We got great commentary, anecdotally, social media from the city. Everyone seemed to think they were a great addition, kind of, breathe some vibrancy back into downtown, especially given where we are with lockdowns and we're all sick of all that stuff. So I think it was well received, and people, and then there was a lot of usage of in the way that we'd like to see people saying, "Oh, I did my errands," or "I went to work," and that's exactly what we want them to be long term, is another transportation alternative for people in cities. So hugely successful. Then there's the a little bit of the hangover after the party, where some people got a little overzealous and took a few scooters. And by the way, just for everyone's edification, that's not unique to Windsor. That happens everywhere. I got a little heated quickly in Windsor. I'll say that, but it's certainly not new. I don't know why people take them. Maybe it's because they feel they can turn them into a private scooter. Maybe they feel they can sell them for something. I don't know. The long story short is you can't do either of those things. And also they emit a constant GPS signal. So it's not like it's hard for us to find them. So, and we always get them back. We spent most of today getting them back. We've only got a handful left to collect. And police are really helping us collect the last few, because those are the harder to get ones, but we've gotten, most of them back already. So we're back out and people are riding, which is great.
They are a lot of fun. I took my father out on the weekend and we went for a ride on them. We were going down the riverfront. I didn't realize that there was a speed limiter, I suppose, that shows up along the riverfront at times. So I was getting pretty upset that he was going faster than me at points. And I canceled my trip and I jumped onto another scooter because I figured maybe the battery was slow. And then his turned off as well because I clicked the wrong button. So I drove off and then I turned around and he was way back waiting for me. And then it was just a funny little hijinks. But,
Right.
the point being is it's really fun. It's really easy to use them. Yeah, so the jumping off and the jumping on is all that I'm trying to express how easy it is when you potentially, kick your father off and leave him behind you because you want to get away or something, I
Yeah.
suppose. Can you tell us any, stats about what the weekend was like other than, the fact that like some were stolen? Like what was your ridership like? I mean, compared to other cities, just looking to get some numbers.
So, first of all, thank you for that, John. I'm glad you enjoyed. That's really what it's all about is, getting people out, getting people to do stuff and transportation alternatives. They're battery powered. They replace car traffic. The riverfront path there obviously is a busy zone for bikes, for pedestrians, other things. So the city has asked us to slow that down. So we have that set to 15 kilometers an hour. We can control the speeds of the scooters anywhere in the city. That's part of the reason why we can find them when people take them. But so we control the speed. So that's a city requirement, is to slow it down, which I think is, 15 kilometers an hour is certainly not super slow, but obviously slower than people tend to go on bicycles and things like that. But we're trying to be good neighbors and good stewards here, and making sure people can get used to them before, and get used to the safety on them before there's a whole bunch of them and before they're kind of permanently everywhere. So to answer your question, we had several hundred rides on both. So we put out 150 scooters on the weekend. We have a maximum of up to 500 that we're required to put out by the city. But typically, when we come to a new city for safety and training and education purposes, we start with a smaller amount. And by the way, we only got the go ahead to launch like around 10 p.m. on Friday. So Saturday we put out 150 scooters, and they were ridden pretty hard. So you can do the math yourself. I think we had something like 500 rides or something like that the first day. So that means each scooter's getting 4.5 rides, which is a lot. And if each ride is a few, several minutes, they're being used fairly frequently. So they weren't sitting around idle for very long. So in terms of take up, it was very strong. But you know what? I'll be honest with you. It's been strong in every city we've been to. I mean, we launched in Calgary in 2019, and we were shocked at in that one summer between ourselves and our competitor Lime that were in the city, there was over 1 million rides taken on Bird and Lime scooters in Calgary. And Calgary's only got 1.3 million population, so you can do the math yourself. It's a lot of people taking rides in Calgary. Obviously, people taking more than one ride, but that's still a lot of rides in a population of 1.3 million. And then we launched in Edmonton shortly thereafter, 2019. They were very popular there. And then last summer we launched in Ottawa, and Ottawa, you figure, okay, it was a smaller fleet, 260 scooters, and even there, by the end of the season, we'd done over 260,000 rides with just 260 scooters, or 240,000 rides with 260 scooters. So you do the math on that as well. So very strong ridership in every city we've been in. It's been strong, and quite frankly, the proportionate ride volumes is similar in Windsor. So it shows you that I think people really want to embrace this technology, and they want to look for another way to get around.
So I look at the list of cities that Bird is in Canada, and I see that Windsor is by quite a bit the smallest city. So I'm curious, how how was the decision made to come to Windsor next?
So there are other cities that are they're smaller than, like, so we have Kelowna has a scooter program, and we're looking at that as well. And Kelowna's smaller than Windsor, but and then there's a whole, like, don't forget the program just got up and going kind of tail end of last year. So there's in Ontario anyways, there's a bunch of cities that are pretty close to launching programs in various degrees of. So London, obviously, relatively similar size to Windsor, and London's looking to finish a program. They're putting out an RFP shortly, and then they'll have a program hopefully at some point later this year. So there's a comparable one to Windsor. Hamilton, which is a little bigger, obviously. Hamilton's looking at a program. They're just doing a little more work, but they're talking about doing a program soon. Mississauga, and so on and so forth. There's many cities in Ontario that are looking for programs. Toronto, not. Toronto's an exception, but Toronto's really kind of out to lunch on this one, to be honest with you. And then across the country, there's so many other cities. There's lots of cities in British Columbia. Richmond, BC, which is a suburb of Vancouver, just put out an RFP to launch a scooter program. As I mentioned, Kelowna already has one. and they're just proliferating across the country. Saskatoon just talked about it. You just go down, you just go, and then obviously in Alberta is pretty covered already, but Lethbridge is looking at it. There's a bunch of other cities as well. So you look across the country, and it's kind of like any city that's got between say 150 to 200,000 people up to Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver. I've all looked at programs, and they're all in various degrees of assessing them.
So when it sounds like it's been successful in every city that you've been in so far. So congratulations on that. Have you gleaned anything about what are the characteristics of a city where Bird is most successful? Are there things in terms of infrastructure or in terms of the population demographics that make it more attractive to you folks?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, it has to be a partnership between the city and the operator. And that's the key thing. So, we scooters are not without their controversy. We certainly faced a bunch of, controversy. But the reality is, once the programs are in place and once people see them unfold, typically all the controversy tends to sort of go away. Because the reality is, we're not in this to kind of throw down a bunch of scooters, make a bit of money, and then kind of pick up and, there's like a dust bunny flying, that's not what we're about. We're a Canadian company, by the way, so we only operate in Canada. So Windsor is an important market to us. We want to be in Windsor for a long time. We don't want to be in Windsor till September. We want to be in Windsor permanently. So in order to do that, even selfishly, aside from the fact that we want to have a safe and reliable operation and not cause people problems, aside from all that, we selfishly want to do that because we want to be a long-term operator. So, in terms of things like, the way scooters are parked, we take a very key, that's why we put out 150 scooters on the weekend and not 500, because we want people to understand how to use scooters, how not to use scooters, how to park scooters. It's very important to us that everyone understands that and gets used to it before we put all the scooters out, so there's no issue. So first and foremost, I say the partnership between the city and the operator is key. That they communicate with us in terms of what they're looking for, and we communicate with them in terms of what we're doing, and we show them that we're prepared to work really hard. I mean, in Ottawa, we were famous for picking up scooters. Even our competitors' scooters, we picked them up within 20 minutes. Why do we pick up our competitors' scooters? Because we want the program to continue. We want to create a good name for ourselves in Ottawa. So even if there was a Lime scooter that was toppled over, blocking someone's path, and someone complained about it, we ran over and picked it up. So that's the first thing. It's the partnership and the long-term commitment to making the program successful. Second thing is, sure, yeah. I mean, if you have more infrastructure, more what we call third lane infrastructure, bike lanes, multi-use pathways, things like that, that obviously helps a lot because people tend to want to ride them in those areas. That's why the riverfront path is so popular for obvious reasons. And then there's a whole bunch of demographic stuff for sure. Density is important because just like any business that relies on, a lot of people to use one thing, whether it's cell phones or scooters, you want some density. And obviously downtown Windsor's got some density. I think if you asked me to go to, I don't know, Collingwood, Ontario, that probably doesn't have the density to really make a scooter program work. So, it all depends on density and things like that.
Is a little bit to just join Doug's question there on the infrastructure. And by the way, so I'm on the board of the Downtown Windsor BIA that oversees the Downtown Windsor Farmers Market that opened up on Saturday. A lot of excitement there. And at one point, I was watching, there was a scooter there. And at one point I was watching folks go to the app and like compete as to who was going to get it. And there, there were like ploys to distract the other person so the other person could get it. So, and a great deal of fun. And we were actually at Maiden Lane and the Alley, and we had another show on Jane's Walk with a friend of ours, Sarah Morris, talking about alleys and things. And there's a lot of interest right now. I'm on a districting committee that's looking at the improvement and activation of alleys. And it almost seems to me that alleys may be, and sort of a natural sort of path for scooters, not on the street necessarily where there are cars, not on any other trails. So it's interesting to look at alleys as possible sort of secondary or even primary for scooters, ways to get around if they're, safe, if they're clean and all those things. But you mentioned the infrastructure, and many of us have been. We're a political show, and we're involved in the municipal issues, and many of us are talking about the type of infrastructure that in many ways is behind in what we believe is behind in our community, like no designated bike lanes, etc. are there, are there concerns on, obviously you're in the market, you're bringing the product here, and we all want to see success. Are there, is there going to be advocacy for, when you say this is a partnership, the municipality, it's not just about being here, it's about, what everybody needs. And it's not just about scooters, but is there an avenue for the discussion about what our infrastructure lacks to make this city truly, one that is accessible to all forms of transportation, not only bicycles, but scooters, and I heard, maybe even e-bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we really view scooters as an extension of a cycling network, and really under the same kind of bailiwick as cycling, which is kind of funny because we got, when they're the detractors, this, we start saying things like, well, all your arguments are the same arguments people said about cycling, 20 years ago. Now people accept cycling as a valid form of transportation. So, we're the new kid on the block. So now we get the abuse that cycling got 20 years ago. Eventually we'll be there and we'll be in the sun like cycling is today. But to answer your question, absolutely. I mean, we see this again as cycling and scootering and anything that wants to use a multi-use pathway or a cycling lane in the same boat. I can give you examples of many cities where they had a scooter program, and that scooter program helped sort of pave the way for an expansion of cycling infrastructure. Atlanta is a good example. They had this sort of massive announcement about a year and a half ago where they expanded massively their cycling infrastructure, because part of the reason was because of the scooter program was so successful in Atlanta. It's one of the big, busier scooter towns. Or Paris, which has a very, the mayor of Paris she's well known for this kind of vision that she's created, where this livable city where she wants everything close together. And she's really done a wonderful job at attacking a whole bunch of different things and focusing on cycling and scooters sort of at the same time. If you've seen pictures or seen what they've done in Paris, they've really, every street has sort of now been condensed, and there's a separated lane, for cycling, for scooters, for any form of travel. So, it's part of the inevitable shift away from vehicles. So we like to, and if anyone asks me, by the way, what is the number one reason why a city would want a scooter program in their city? It's because of the reduction in vehicle traffic. That's the number one reason why. So in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Ottawa, every city we've ever been in and around the world, it's typically 30 to 40% of the time someone says, I would have taken a car instead of this scooter trip. But you can reverse that around, that every sort of 3 scooter trips replaces 1 car trip. So I mentioned before, there are 1 million scooter trips taken in Calgary in the first summer. Now it's more than that. But so that could, so you look at the numbers there, and that's a hell of a lot of like 333,000 potentially car trips not taken. So that's a lot of car trips not taken, and that's really the number one reason why cities want that. So we're in favor of obviously expansion of infrastructure for cycling and multi-use and reduction in vehicle usage, which is the way the world's moving anyways. I mean, it's inevitable. It's not like we're not building more roads in downtown areas. Congestion is only getting worse. The only solution is public transit and micromobility options. And public transit is, as we all know, is incredibly expensive and takes forever. And and to some degree already uses motor vehicles, so it's difficult to expand it. So it is what it is.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot for sure, and I don't know about the other cities to compare, but you mentioned 20 years ago was the battle for bike infrastructure. Then maybe we're a little behind the curve there because we're still battling bike infrastructure, right. And in some ways, the bike infrastructure in some communities may very well pave the path for this sort of thing, but Windsor is a community where it is a going concern, and the ongoing development of bike infrastructure. Although there's certainly active transportation plan, it's just really interesting that this was the pilot for active transportation. In what we're seeing.
Yeah, no, you're certainly right about. I guess I'm thinking more of the larger cities. So Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. In fact, Montreal went a little bit. They went pretty aggressively in their bike lane expansion during COVID, and now there's some pushback on that, as it did Toronto. I mean, Toronto announced that Yonge Street, the biggest street in the biggest city, is going to be reduced to 2 lanes, 1 lane each direction, and have a bike lane running all the way down it from pretty much from the midtown of the city all the way to the suburbs. So it's happening in all the big cities in Canada. It's a matter of time before it proliferates to the smaller cities. And the reality is in smaller cities like Windsor, I mean, there's a lot of competing priorities. So I sympathize with that. I mean, it's difficult when you only have so much of a tax base and there's a lot to do. And, all it's certainly with COVID and all the challenges, but, now is also the flip side of that argument is now the time to embrace it, right? With COVID and people taking things like scooters and cycling, to a greater degree, now's the time to embrace it. And that's why cities like Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver have kind of expanded their approach.
Now, Windsor is Windsor, Essex, but like our region, lots of space. We are Canada's home of the automobile. Sprawl is something that we discuss often on this show. As such, parking is something that comes up on this show very, very often. The city opted to go with a dockless model. So there aren't dedicated parking spots for the e-scooters. And I'll say, I thought that was my biggest criticism at the beginning. I didn't see it working, having used it, having, left it at the end point of my journey. And then I guess, 20 minutes later, there were people who walked by, they picked it up and they went somewhere else. So, the model proved to work. Congratulations. It was really surprising to watch that happen. I thought that was great. But I saw that after, I guess this temporary situation that you were in to go retrieve the stolen ones. And I don't mean to be focusing on it. I'm sure it's not that big a deal for you, but here in Windsor, it was branded as a suspension temporarily by our media, and they all went with it. So I guess that was the story of the day. But I checked the app now and I see that there are ones back on the street, but now you have, designated parking areas. And I didn't see those when I first used the app on the weekend. Now, did I just miss those the first time through, or is that a new feature that you rolled out like in response to this? And like, I thought that was pretty innovative.
Yeah, we had some of those. There might be some more that have just recently, because we were constantly kind of fiddling with the map. But so we definitely had them on the weekend, but there might have been some more you've seen. But like, we made some practical adjustments because of the theft issue. So in order to keep it down, and by the way, the theft issue goes away, they said, in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, Windsor's no different. So we kind of deploy them in a tighter area at the beginning, just so keep an eye on them. We have to have more people. It costs us a whole bunch of money because we have to have more people on the street watching them. Sort of more visible presence. So we're making sure we're all wearing our bird T-shirts and we're all out there, kind of, showing that we're there, so people don't steal them. And so we have to kind of, and then the whole media thing. Their media kind of went with the story and all that, and we did, I guess, and theoretically, we did suspend operations for the day, but and we were, the theft was a little bit over the top, but the flip side is, of course, that the media attention helps us, give people pause and help people, alert people to the fact that this is going on. And we've already gotten some citizens saying things like, "Hey, I saw someone taking a scooter here, and that's happened the last few hours." So, that's helpful to us. So, it's, if a community wants something to happen, they can make it happen. So I hope that, this to some degree galvanize people to make sure that people behave themselves and limits the bad actors. Obviously, I'm not encouraging anyone to be a vigilante and get in a discussion with someone who's taking one, but to the extent that people are aware that this is happening and trying to discourage the behavior, that's super helpful, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that. Pat, I think that you're on mute there, but let's bring you in. I'm sure it's important.
Actually, I wanted to ask about that because when you follow a little bit of social, there's also some commentary on the type of people that would, not allow us to have good things. And there seems to be this sort of commentary, which is very Windsor, on, poo-pooing on the type of people that are in Windsor or certain segments, et cetera. I won't go too much into that, but I'm wondering whether, based on your experience in the last few days, you said this happens in all cities, it's sort of a novelty. It starts off, this is sort of what happens, and it seems to tone down in a few weeks when people just realize this is just another mode of transportation and this is a program. And yes, there is GPS, and yes, we will find them in all those things. I'm wondering whether, without too many specifics, but if you could share whether the experience of how they've gone missing in Windsor, is that the same or different than other communities? So specifically, like, is it people pranking and this is just cool, let's try and see if we can do it, Or is it people trying to get it for parts? Are they, are they on the just part of a shopping cart or whatever? Like, what is your experience? Is it different in Windsor, or is it pretty well what you've been seeing in other communities when this starts off?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar, I would say. I mean, ultimately, look, I don't want to overplay it too. I mean, we're talking about we put out 150 scooters, and as you said, we lost like 10 to 15 in the first day. So it's not like there's thousands of people running around downtown. That's so. But for us, every scooter is extremely expensive, and to lose 10% of the ones we just put out within 24 hours is kind of shocking, because you can do the math yourself, and after a few days you've lost that group, and we only have 500, so it's not like there's endless supply, and they're very expensive. So we haven't, we lost a lot of money over the weekend just until we get the scooters back. So any event, but and I certainly wouldn't don't want to pick on people that are down on their luck and have issues. I mean, that's not for me to comment. They're placed in downtown areas a lot, and there tends to be people downtown in any city, sadly in any large city in Canada, and this is one of the tough issues in any downtown area, where you get people with mental illness or homeless people or both, and or just bad actors and just a poor element, and it's a sad situation. So there's a certain amount of sympathy there, obviously, but end of the day, what typically happens is the average example is someone takes a scooter. I think it's more the curiosity, and they think that they could either turn it into a private scooter, as I said, or break it up for parts. But then we show up at their house, we knock on their door, and they say, the usual answer is, I thought that someone was going to take this, so I'm just keeping it here for safekeeping or something like that. Something along those lines, where they were trying to do us a favor, and then they give it back. And then you get the odd person who's aggressive, at which point we have to stop and call the police, and the police come in. And Windsor police have been great. We had a conversation with them today again, and they were helpful in the last couple of days. And that's the stickier ones that were harder to get back, we got them almost all back. So as I said before, there's only a few left that are outstanding. We got almost all of them back, and that's why we're back at it. But yeah, it happens everywhere. I mean, you could even Google. I'm sure there's still articles available on Google that were from Edmonton. We launched a couple of years ago. Same thing happened. Edmonton downtown has got some tougher areas where people have are down on their luck, and there's issues there, and people have taken scooters there. And we had an issue where we lost a whole bunch early on there as well, and we did the same thing. We slowed it down, and we had to go gather them. And by the way, 2 years later, it doesn't happen anymore. It's totally gone, which is wonderful, and people really enjoy them in Edmonton, and we've had a successful program there for over 2 years.
Right.
Well, really glad to see that, we're not really the exception, I guess, to the rule. Like, if there are issues that have happened in other cities, but, I guess we're a bit worse than other cities, but, it's not the end of not the
I
end
think
of the
we're
day.
only worse about being worse.
Well, look, I'm an Ontario guy. None of this phases me. I've lived in this province my whole life. I used to live in London. Our chairman went to Windsor, so this is home turf. So, I'm sympathetic, and I'll defend my fellow Ontarians as much as possible, whether they're from Windsor or London or wherever. So, hey, it's just we'll get it fixed, and people will realize there's no usefulness in taking the scooters, and this will pass just like it does in the other cities.
Well, Stewart, I mean, the program is here. You're here. There are new jobs that have come from it. It's exciting. People are having fun. Personally, we hope that everybody can stay safe, that it's good for the company, and that, as you said, that this nonsense dissipates as time goes on, and it's not as interesting anymore to steal one or whatever is happening. And also that hopefully we can continue to advocate for the really good infrastructure that is needed to make all of these active transportation modes possible in our community. And if that's part of it, then that'll be a really good thing that's added to it as well, in my opinion. So yep. Thank you for being here. We know you had a really, really long day in responding to things and dealing with by the way, it was the mayor, I think, that used the word suspension on the tweet. So we always like to blame the mayor on this. So just kidding. But thank you so much for joining us, guys. I don't know if you have any other questions. Yeah.
I guess no, I did have one last one that I did want to quickly ask. just looking here, going through your LinkedIn, co-founder of Sirius XM Canada, senior vice president, emerging business at Sirius XM Radio. You were the CEO of the largest Canadian cloud provider, Terrago Networks, as well as the president of Moblicity, national wireless carrier that was sold to Rogers. How'd you find yourself in the e-scooter business?
I won't go. I'll give you the short version because it'll probably take up too much of your time and you'll lose some listeners along the way. But no. Long story short is I've been working for 20 years with John Bidtove, who's our chairman. He actually, as I said, he went to University of Windsor, and we did satellite radio together and a bunch of other things together. And long story short, I got connected to Bird, working in Silicon Valley, and they were obviously launching in markets across the U.S. And then they said, look, we're looking to, partner with people who would want to kind of license our technology and take, countries that are, I guess, less core for us and who have more local knowledge than we do, and they could just run the business in those countries and, basically be a license agreement. So we struck up a license agreement with Bird, and we are separate entirely from Bird US, but we do use obviously their branding, their technology, their app, all those things, which helps us obviously be nimble and be able to appear like a larger player, but still be Canadian. So so that kind of gives us a lot of flexibility. We're kind of local on the one hand, but we're also international on the other hand. So we have the best of both worlds. We have the learnings of an international player and understand what it's like to operate in Canada. So. And that happened a couple of years ago, and we've been sort of working through it ever since. And now the regulatory speed is starting to increase with all these new cities coming online. And we hope by next year you will have Vancouver's and the Montreal's on board as well.
Absolutely. Hopefully that Windsor will be one of the pilot cities that is in the positive checkmark column that you have.
Absolutely, and just to be clear, we're so appreciative that Windsor actually took the leap to do this relatively quickly. I mean, the only other city in Ontario that had done this already was Ottawa. So Windsor's in good company. I think it's a great feather in the cap of council that they actually took staff that they took the initiative to try something new and different. And the question before was raised about dockless. You mentioned it, John, versus non-dockless. And the reality is, especially for cycling, because there's a cycling element to this, but for bike programs, dock programs cost money because they don't make money, unfortunately. They're all subsidized. So Toronto subsidized, Montreal subsidized, Vancouver subsidized, and that's very challenging for the smaller cities. And they're subsidized to millions of dollars. It's not like they're subsidized for $1,000. So this allows private players to come in and use a model that can be hopefully profitable and can actually allow programs for scooters and bikes to come to cities like Windsor. That's why you go dockless versus docked.
Oh, hey, thank you for that background there. And thank you so much for your time, Stewart. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, you have yourself a wonderful evening.
A nice meeting all of you, and hopefully we'll chat again.
Yeah, hopefully next time in person we can share a pint after we've already gone for a scooter
We normally
ride.
Our tradition is to have an after show thing, but lockdown has impacted us, so
Great.
take a rain check.
Well, maybe later in the summer, second doses and everything else, and
on a patio somewhere.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Pleasure meeting all of you. Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers. That was Stewart Lyons, CEO and founder of Bird Canada. Really glad to have him on the show there. I still find the dockless model just wild, having to go before city council and defend an application for newspaper boxes that were in fixed locations throughout the city. Yet here they can just be left everywhere. And the biggest concern before was a car driving into a newspaper box. But it's great to see, the times changing. I guess we have new counselors on council. They bring a different vision. I don't think that this would have passed under the past council at all.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, and I'm so glad that we had Stewart on. Besides the fact that he's very engaging, I think he brought some interesting stuff to light that we might not have uncovered. And it is, to support your point, John, this happened in Windsor ahead of a whole lot of other cities, and it was kind of between the lines in his answer, but the reason is because the regulator moved quickly here. And that is not something that we're used to in Windsor. We're not used to um, changes happening quickly or new initiatives happening here before they happen elsewhere. So maybe you're right. Maybe it's a positive change.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think that John, I'm going to say the same thing, and it's not so much a criticism to look back and say, oh, look at, it's actually interesting to see how they go forward. I don't know how selective we are in terms of the leadership and the bureaucracies in terms of, where red tape gets smoothed over faster, or where it's cut and where it's not. And all of that. But for sure, it was pretty interesting to hear that we are one of the first. And for that, I'm always really glad to be on the progressive end of new initiatives. I think, I really appreciated that he did, he's working with the municipality, or the company's working with the municipality, but he also didn't, shy away from the fact that there is a lot of room for improvement on the infrastructure. And it sounds to me that there is an ally in those who will be asking for that. So that could be a good thing too.
Yeah, I think that having, I mean, as much as it pains me to say, I think that if, a group like Bike Friendly Windsor Essex were to make an application or to make a pitch forward with an entity like Bird Canada saying, we want to have dedicated lanes for reasons A, B, and C, I think it would be, better received. And that's not a slight at all against, Bike Friendly Windsor Essex, but Windsor has always had this go out of town for our consultants, go out of town to try to find the best answer. We've always got that inferiority complex that is talked about so often here. I agree with you, Pat, 100%. I think that having another ally, and especially a national ally, in this fight towards or this advocacy towards better infrastructure is a huge positive, especially because I think people on the road are just going to have to start dealing with these more and more. I called the Windsor police before I went on to a scooter just to ask them, what's the rules of the road if I'm on one of these? It doesn't go 50 kilometers an hour. Olette Avenue is 2 lanes, 1 each way. Where am I supposed to ride? And Windsor police told me very clearly, ride where you feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable on the right-hand side of the road, that's your prerogative, but ride where you're comfortable. So I think that, if you start to see a lot of people riding up and down Olette Avenue, taking up the lane on a couple scooters, slowing things down to 25 kilometers, talk about great advocacy. You're going to have more drivers advocating for dedicated bike lanes or third paths, as Stewart said, more than the active cyclists ever have before. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. I'm glad that the program's back up and running. And as you said, Doug, it's great to be at the forefront of something rather than being told, well, we'll do a study and we'll circle back to it in 5 to 10 years and see what it looks like.
I don't want to push it too far. Studies are not a bad thing necessarily. I just want to put that in there only because, this was rushed. This was part of, the Windsor, let's face it, we talked about the Windsor Works report. It was in there, which as great or as this program may be and as exciting as that may be to get it in Windsor, no matter what, a scooter program is not in the realm of what you would include in a Windsor Works report that's supposed to be looking at things from 10,000 feet off the ground, not at something so specific as this. So there's that. Let's not get too carried away here.
You're such a professor. I've done one of the 1,000 requirements, and there's no one here championing me saying, well, you're one step closer towards the end.
I do, want to say, what, the one question that I think about now that in retrospect, if I had thought of it, I would have asked is the piece about there are organizations of persons with disabilities or varying abilities that also have concern about scooters. And I'm sorry I didn't think at the time when he was on to ask him that. But I thought he was just wonderful to have on the show, and hopefully next time he's on, we can follow up with some other questions as well.
Yeah, we only had so much time. Lord knows he's probably dealing with some other stuff. But speaking of only so much time, we've got two other topics that we want to get to tonight. Thank you, dear listener, for staying with us. This next segment, it's a spicy one. Residential taxes are rising in Windsor despite an overall 0% increase. You heard that right. While Windsor City Council passed a 2.4% property tax increase for residences, they announced that taxes would be frozen at 0%. Commercial businesses, however, are seeing a 6% cut. But the average residential taxpayer with the home valued at $150,000 would see that 2.42% rounds out to about $65. Council approved this in the proposed 2021 budget, and it was centered on the property tax freeze. This was after the Ontario government took the $10.5 million less in the education levy. That money was applied to some of the city's other expenses, but this year marked the first time the province put conditions on that, according to Windsor's city treasurer, who said the education levy was specifically targeted to commercial industrial classes, unlike in the past when it was applied across all tax classes. But city officials remain firm. The overall tax levy would not be increasing. So to offset the residential tax increase, commercial businesses and office spaces had to see the decrease of about 6%. Industrial businesses will also see a similar tax decline. As we said, this is new, though. The province placed a hold on 2021 assessment updates for residential taxpayers. What does that mean for you? Well, new assessment values will once again be delayed, meaning municipal property tax assessments will not increase. Now, the mayor, Drew Dilkins, says that the province of Ontario's Ford government, that's weird wording, that comes from CBC, the government of the province under Ford, the mayor says, is responsible for defining which tax class will see the cuts and increases. And he says that anyone who looks at a 2.42% increase as a deceptive move by council needs to think otherwise. I think that this is going to be sort of the focus of where we go tonight on this one. Quote from the mayor: when we say 0% tax increase, we're not spending more this year net than we did last year. And that has been the number we have always looked at. What is the amount that we're levying to the tax base? How that shakes out to the different classes is not something you can determine with precision on budget night. It's impossible, says the mayor. Now, Doug, I saw you nodding along there, so I'm going to bring your voice in first. I find this to be, it's a lot like the sewer surcharge debate that we had under the Francis administration, where, it was said one thing, taxes were held still. That's what the average person heard communicated to them through the media. It didn't necessarily translate to that. Now, what I find most interesting about this, though, is that because the city said that they weren't doing the tax increase at all, it says that they were forced to go and put an increase onto the residences because of the decrease that was applied to the commercial and industrial classes. So our homeowners here, is the residential class being scorned by the city here needlessly because of some pledge that was made to try to get votes at some point? What's your take on this one here?
So I think this is a really interesting one. And the reason that I think so is that this is where the simplicity of the rhetoric runs into trouble because it collides with reality, which is a little bit more complex. And I think when you're crafting a soundbite, when you're honing a message, you want to convey the essence of what you are going to achieve or what you're trying to do in a way that is very simple, that's catchy, that people will repeat and will remember. Um, and there's no question that hold the line on taxes has been one of the most successful political slogans in the past 25 years in Windsor. It's been extremely successful. It's always been a little bit frayed at the edges because there are always asterisks and complications. You mentioned the sewer surcharge. The other thing is that many residents' taxes will go up after an assessment because their property value went up more than their neighbors and so forth. So it's always been a little bit fuzzy, but for the most part, it was containable. In this case, though, what I find so interesting about this is the rhetoric is aimed at residents. The rhetoric is aimed at homeowners. After all, that is who votes. That is who elects a city government. 0% tax increase. We are going to hold the line on taxes. And now what's happened here, and I take the mayor at his word that the city council had limited foreknowledge of what was going to happen. But now we're in a situation where it looks like you're a liar. It looks like you flat out lied because you said 0% tax increase, and now residents' taxes are going up by a couple of percentage points. And I think the challenge there is that this simple message is now not simple enough to contain the reality that everyone's experiencing. So I'm wondering how this is going to play out. I think that Mayor Dilkins trying to explain it is going to be a really difficult thing for him to achieve because um, it's not such a simple matter, but this message has been so simple and hammered for so long. If I were advising the mayor back in February, March, whenever the budget landed, I might have advised him to be a little bit less definitive in a situation where you're not in ultimate control of how that levy is going to be split up and how different classes are going to experience it, and maybe toning down the rhetoric and setting expectations a little bit would have been a wiser move. But here we are, and I think that there is a little bit of public anger and confusion, and I think it's the inevitable result of the narrative that has been set.
I got to think that it's probably rightful anger if someone wasn't aware of what the nuances. Lord knows it's a lot of nuance that's in this conversation. If they weren't aware, Doug, I guess you were sort of touching on where I want to go with this question. The risks of oversimplifying issues for your constituents. Um, I guess like if the a more cynical person might say, the art of misdirecting or putting a shiny object out for constituents, it can really blow back against you when they come to, learn the nuance, as I was discussing there. In this situation, where it's the elected official that's having to now explain the nuance that was omitted for so long, that kind of blowback, there's a real concern there because you're now basically telling your audience to really open their eyes and see and question, what the past 5, 10, 15 years might have actually been about. What's that risk?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that that's why hold the line on taxes falls short of being an ideal political slogan. Ideally, in my opinion, you want a political slogan to gain in power as you learn more, as your understanding becomes deeper, that you're always coming back to that phrase, that slogan, and it rings true and it makes sense to you. The problem with hold the line on taxes and the problem with framing holding city revenue to a static number and framing it as lowering or keeping tax rates the same is that you just don't control it as tightly as you might want to. And at the end of the day, the thing that you're selling is not the thing that you're ultimately delivering. I think that there are better ways to message this. I think messaging, a slogan that the city is pursuing a policy of fiscal prudence, that we are a fiscally sound city, that we are controlling spending. All of those things, all of those type of messages would still be consistent with the reality of the situation. But what you have with Hold the Line on Taxes is a message that ends up being inconsistent with reality, and I think it creates a lot of risk.
Yeah, I mean, I got to agree. I think it'll be. I don't think there's going to be too much blowback from it. I agree that the risk is there. I guess we'll see how it plays out. Election still is still some times away, but I mean, other than some people being upset in the short term and maybe a couple letters to the editor, do you think there's going to be any real pushback?
I think ultimately that depends on what campaigns do with it, both ward campaigns and mayoral campaigns next year. Um, I I wonder how Mr. Dilkins is going to frame his record and how forward he's going to be about the 2021 tax freeze, considering that this happened. So it's hard to say. I don't think that things in politics just happen by magic. It takes political actors to push them forward and make them happen. So it's going to come down to the debates we have next year, and hopefully they're going to be robust. And that's the time, I hope, when we have a really serious conversation about tax policy in Windsor and what it means and what the options are going forward. And this likely will be part of it.
We can only hope that it is a rigorous election that's based on the facts and not one that gets distracted by shiny objects and fancy announcements, or I don't know, who knows. I have a feeling that we're coming into a season of elections that are going to be something unlike that we've seen or experienced before at all three levels, and we'll be there to talk about it, Lord knows. Maybe host some debates. We'll get on to our last topic of the night tonight. Thank you to CBC Windsor's Sanjay Maru, who put this one out. Despite point of order, Essex Council moves ahead with tightened proxy vote measures. Essex councillors have expressed concern new voting measures could lead to lower voter turnout. New voting rules for proxy voting have resulted in one councillor raising a point of order during a discussion over why such measures were needed. Mayor Larry Snively told Councillor Sherry Bondi, "You better watch what you're saying," at one point during the debate. Bondi had called for tighter rules after fraud charges were laid against Snively, alleging voter fraud in the 2018 municipal elections. The charges haven't been proven in court. The next appearance is the 28th of May. Under the old rules, a voter and proxy needed to fill out information and sign a form with an oral oath before the vote. CBC Windsor obtained 94 proxies from the last election. 31 were incorrectly filled out but allowed by the city clerk. Under the new rules, you now have to obtain a form from the clerk's office in person or mail, bring a serial numbered form with the identification of the person who will be voting to the clerk's office. Councillor Bondi said Essex clearly had an issue recording votes in the 2018 election. She said, quote, "In the last election, we had people with dementia, seniors, widows, minorities, who frankly got duped into signing a form by other people." Quite serious allegations. Bondi challenged fellow councillors to read constituent emails expressing concerns with the election process. Snively responded, "One day I'll show you the letter I have stating you accused me of different things. I'll show you that, and the media will have a copy of it too. So, Councillor Bondi, you better watch what you're saying." Wow. Councillor Chris Vanderdolen, no stranger of the podcast, expressed his concerns with people being discouraged from voting by proxy because of the additional steps, and said we'll have to wait and see how the next election goes and whether there has been a disparity between votes cast in prior elections to this one with the new rules in place. Got to say, wasn't expressing Councillor Vanderdolen to come out in favor of the looser voting restrictions, really breaking away from the Fox News rhetoric that he's been using on a regular basis. But good for him. Welcome back to the post-media world of things in Canada. Great to have you here, Councillor. Wild, just absolutely wild what's going on in Essex. I'd say hit the Essex theme. It's just, you're getting threats levied here from the mayor on a councillor. I mean, Pat, obviously, I'm really looking forward to your input on it from the legal perspective. Sounds like a threat, really sounds like a threat. I mean, you better watch what you're saying. That's just wild. Also, I mean, these allegations, these charges haven't been proven yet, but for the councillor to say that people with dementia, seniors, widows, and minorities were illicitly duped into signing a proxy form. Very serious allegations, getting to the heart of, I suppose, whether or not elected representatives in Essex even have the right to be serving in the roles that they are serving in. So, Pat, I want your voice in just from the legal perspective. And Doug, I'm sure you got lots that you need to say, and I want to hear it too. But the legal perspective, my word, what is happening in the county?
Well, I'm going to not speak from a legal perspective right now. I'm going to speak as a woman. I have to say that anytime that somebody says you have to watch what you say and then proceed to say all the rest of that, my goodness, did I think it was a threat? I absolutely it was a threat. What kind of a threat? Only he kind of knows, and perhaps Counselor Bondi, but what he's basically saying is, I'm going to expose something that you've written. I assumed, and he even mentioned that he will, share it with the media, and he went on. Just atrocious behavior as far as I'm concerned, and possibly, I don't know their code of ethics over there, but certainly something that may very well be an integrity commissioner complaint. In fact, if he thought that Councillor Bondi had done something that was a breach of a code of ethics, then that would have been the appropriate method in which to deal with it, aside from having a communication with colleagues, in terms of conduct. But in essence, I thought that his conduct was appalling towards Councillor Bondi, and his words were, we talk about microaggressions. This was like a macroaggression, if you ask me, and completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Pat. That's when you get into the point where elected officials are threatening each other in while they're performing their duties in office, you're in a really bad place. This is far from the first time that we have identified Essex politics as a bad place. There is a rough political culture there, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. We had a lot of fun in the Randy Vokes era and the Mayor McDermott era, and you hoped that in 2018 Essex had turned a page and was going to be able to move forward in a more constructive direction. It does not seem that has happened, and it is exceedingly disappointing. The mayor obviously should apologize, and hopefully we'll see that happen. He should retract those statements. But I wanted to talk about the substance of the issue. We've talked about this before. 31 proxies out of 94 incorrectly filled out but allowed by the clerk. That was the numbers that were reported by CBC, and I think that on its face might lead one to believe that that's a slam dunk evidence that there was electoral fraud. and I'm not so sure that that's the case. Um, I think that when you allow proxy voting, there is a tendency to err on the side of permissiveness because you're disenfranchising someone when you don't allow a vote. And I think that that's a reasonable approach to take as a person managing an election, except when a bad actor takes advantage of it. And if that has happened here, and a bad actor has taken advantage of loose proxy rules, and did indeed, basically submit fraudulent proxy votes, then I think there's absolutely no choice. The municipality has no choice but to tighten up the rules, and it's an unfortunate consequence. Is it possible that some people will be discouraged, or it becomes impossible for them to vote by proxy because of these steps? Yeah, it is. But I guess sometimes you have to choose between harms, and the harm of a few people not being able to vote because of tighter rules is, in my opinion, a lot less harm than people not having trust in the system that elects their representatives and fraudsters being able to get away with their nonsense.
I think that there are actually all sorts of ways in which you can take a look at how proxy vote happens. And in fact, you can even take a look at ways that, and they may be costly, and municipalities or other organizations that oversee voting may not want to do it, but there are definitely other ways. So these are not the only solutions. You might be able to eliminate the proxy completely. Is there a reason why the person can't go out and vote? Are there ability issues? Why can't somebody go to them and get the vote? So there are other things that can happen here. Obviously, they were dealing with a very specific situation here, and it's reactive. And I'm always concerned whether it's a policy or a bylaw or any type of rule that comes into play that is reacting to something. And without taking a step back and saying, okay, it's not about solving that thing. Let's take a step back and say, what is the problem? What are the solutions, and what are the best solutions to that? But I think that, going back to what you said, Doug, in terms of, generally speaking, what we're seeing coming out of county politics, and is that I don't think we're going to see a change until there is more renewal there. And that means, we've talked about diversity in who we elect and who's around the table and the type of respect that it is. But you don't have to go too far to look around the table and see that that doesn't exist, which is what leads to, somebody being treated this way. A colleague, a duly elected official, who, whether you agree with her or not, that is not a way to react. I do want to say there was the counselor, and I don't remember who that was, who did at some point indicate point of order and jumped in to try and stop what was happening. So that was good to see.
I wonder about, we hear the number 36 of, roughly 100 that were obtained. So I guess, we're saying a 33%, 30% rate of issue with these proxies. I'm looking here at the 2018 municipal election results for Essex, as one does on their Wednesday evenings. And they don't list the number of proxies that were cast. But you look at the margins here, and most of them are pretty handily, aside from mayor, where it was 2261 versus 2144. That's the closest margin from first to second. You're looking here, deputy mayor, it's 4,000 to 3,000, and then ward councilors, 1,000 to 741. So the margins there are pretty clear. I don't know where Councillor Bondi is coming from with, regards to alleging serious improprieties. I'm sure she's got, it's coming from a place of good faith. I don't think that she's a bad actor in this sphere. It'll be interesting to see how the court case follows through. But, just on a lighter note here, I'm looking at the votes cast for French language public school trustee. And I just like, There were 13 votes cast total across 3 candidates.
Wow. Hey,
One
votes
two,
can win that, baby.
two of them received 2 votes and one received 9 votes.
Not
I
to-
mean, also the French language separate school trustee, 0 votes and was acclaimed.
yeah.
Didn't even vote for themselves.
Well, maybe they weren't eligible, to be fair.
Oh, that's fair.
So we just had a new government form in Yukon. I don't know if you guys know that one of the ridings was tied,
I
75
saw
votes
this.
to 75. I got curious because I was like, how can we be electing an MPP in this somewhere in this country, or an MLA, whatever, with fewer than 200 votes? So I looked back at the history of this riding, and yeah, they actually have like about 85% voter turnout. They only have 160 electors, and almost everybody votes. But I guess if you were part of a pool of 150 people who are going to pick an MPP, you would make sure that you vote. But I did just want to make one quick point on this, and I know we're looking to wrap the show up. But John, you were talking about the margins of victory, and I want to just add some context to that. There was a lot made of this at the time, that even if all the proxies went the other way, or were thrown out, it would not have changed the outcome of the election. But I don't think that's the metric to look at when you're assessing whether someone had a motivation, which is separate from whether they did it or not, but whether someone had a motivation to play games or commit some kind of fraud. The election was so tight. That mayoral election was so extremely tight, and you're sitting there in the fog of war during the campaign. It's tight, but there's no polls in the Essex election. Everything is anecdotal and guesswork. If you know that it's a tight election, and you're not a person who has high ethical standards, the temptation to commit this kind of act must be extremely high. So to me, it's more about, there was a tight margin, that means that there's a motive. If the election was a romp and you accuse the winner of electoral fraud, I would kind of laugh it off, because if you've got it in the bag, why are you going to play silly games like that? But in this case, at least on the surface, I think there are reasons that would motivate someone to do that.
Well, I think that that's a really good point, in that nobody knows the result of the election, and so one doesn't know how close it's going to be, and then so that it's more likely, thinking if it's going to be close, if somebody did want to take advantage of whatever loose rules there were to allow them to do so. I do want to say, though, that ultimately it's not the motivation that matters, but actual action that is illegal. And that's a matter for the courts ultimately to determine. What the council there is dealing with is, are there ways to tighten up the opportunity for that to happen? Whether it happened or not is for someone else to say at this point.
And we'll see how the court case goes. And I just, it's amazing how vitriolic county politics gets. It blows me away. Obviously, we're coming on the heels of the Chris Vanderdolen issue. This is 2 weeks after, as you said, Doug. There was definitely lots of vitriol in the prior administration between Vokes and Toots there. How do you not use the moniker that he himself goes around town publicly using? You can't not. It's great. I always said, like, the smaller the politics, and I don't mean to discount the politics of Essex, but the smaller the pool of people that are involved in politics, the bloodier it always seems to be. Like, I mean, personalities rise, I suppose, and it's very much it's very much like high school or university student council type politics, where everything is on the line. And that's not to say it doesn't exist in other levels of government, but they're more nuanced in how they go gutting a fish, I suppose.
Ask any ethnic organization.
Or EDA.
All right.
There you go. Well, folks, we made it through. We did it again. Always proud of us when we do it. I can't wait till we're not doing these pre-records and we're back in person.
I was glad to see our BizX, the BizX magazine out. I hope people go out and get a chance to read it, particularly since, you know, one of the, for those that don't know who we are and that we come from different perspectives in many cases, we definitely agree on a lot of things. We, you know, disagree, there's nuance and everything. But for those that sometimes don't, you know, it's a good approach to take a look at the different ways that we approach issues. So hopefully people will pick up a copy of BizX.
And grab a copy of BizX. Make sure that if you don't already, like, share, and subscribe. We're on all of your favorite social media apps, all of your favorite podcasting apps. Thanks for making it through another episode of Rose City Politics. We will be dropping a special as well with Rose City Politics alumnus, former producer Sarah Morris. We're talking with her about the Windsor Jane's Walk. She is the organizer of it. And we talk about, you know, the shift to COVID, the new digital element, and how it's going to be sticking around moving into the future, which is great. So thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you to Leuna625, building better communities. We will be back next week with another episode. This is Rose City Politics.